How many of you guys have been on TV? All right. How many of you guys have been on the radio? Awesome. In the news, I know Pat's in the newspaper all the time. How many of you have been in the newspaper? Okay, good. So you're part of the way there. Now, when you get back, do you believe that you deserve media coverage?
My answer is not necessarily.
Good.
You gotta show some kind of. It seems to me there's two things you have to do, one or the other. You have to achieve something and talk about it, or you have to have something that is above the noise level.
Yep.
So, a headline that's a little provocative or edgy or something that's defensible.
Yeah, I don't think we deserve anything first, but I do think that if you have a compelling story to tell, and you have a sufficiently talented individual who can write, and a compelling message to deliver, then yeah, I think you do deserve it. And I think that you also deserve the right to deserve the ability, the right to engage your media to get that told.
Okay.
That happens.
Anybody think that you do deserve media coverage? Just for being?
No, not at all.
Okay, good. Because that's one of the biggest mistakes that I think that we make is we just assume that because we've written that qualifying fee check or we filled out the nominating paperwork or whatever the process is for you in your state, that we just somehow deserve, as especially candidates, that they just deserve to be covered by the media, and then we get upset when we're not covered. And then we just become belligerent, caustic, acerbic, for lack of a better term, assholes about it, that we're not getting coverage. And that makes them want to cover us even less. So one of the things that I undertook in 2010, when we were in the midst of our first full slate of statewide candidates, was reaching out to the media directly, one-on-one, calling reporters one-on-one, just to talk to them about why, just asking, not, why aren't you guys covering us, but, hey, John, we've got, a guy who won 1 million votes 2 years ago running for governor. Why aren't you covering him? You didn't cover his announcement. We had a press conference for him. You didn't cover his announcement. And, some did, but, I made sure I knew who came and who didn't. And I was mostly focusing on our governor candidate because he was by far our highest measure of electoral success in Georgia. And what I found was they actually wanted us in the past, but we weren't responsive, which is another problem that we run into as libertarians. Because I know that when I came on board in Georgia and I checked the voicemail for the first time, there were 32 messages that were not listened to. And half of them were from the media, asking for our position on this, that, or the other. And I'm not going to bash who was around before me, but geez, that seems like a no-brainer that you're returning phone calls, especially from those guys. So when you're reaching out to the media about an event that's coming up, what do? What are you doing now?
Well, press releases when we can.
Why a press release?
Notification.
Okay.
Let them know, hey, this thing's coming up.
Anything else? Any follow-up on a couple key people? Do you guys know who your weekend anchors are that do stories during the week and stuff like that? Who covers your specific area? Well, and I'll get to ads in a little bit because that does kind of factor into what we're talking about. So we send out press releases. Anybody doing media advisories, just the who, what, when, where, why. Because really, press releases are to give them the story after the fact. But if you're doing the who, what, when, where, why in a media advisory, which is just, it's maybe 2 sentences and then a couple of literally listing who's doing it. It's the Libertarian Party of Texas, where it's in Waco, when it's June 29th, what it's launched 2014.
Yeah.
So it's not just it's not just a press release of the events coming out per se, but it's a simple
Yeah, it's just to let
What's
them
your
know.
format look like? Is there, I mean, can I go online and find a format for that, or do you just generally do it in an email, to the editor or to the?
Yeah, well, we
reporter?
maintain a media contact list, and we have it segmented so that if it's an Atlanta event, it's Atlanta media that are getting it. If it's something that's happening in Savannah, the Savannah folks are getting it. If it's happening out in Augusta, that kind of thing. I mean, we have, the one big media market, and then we have 3 kind of smaller markets, and we even go into Tennessee with stuff. Anything we do near the Tennessee border, we go with the folks in Chattanooga. But we're really specific and precise in who we're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's a statewide issue that we're trying, when the budget came out and it was signed into law and we saw that it was a growth beyond population, the Republicans like to say, well, it's not growing government if we keep pace with inflation and population growth. So we sat down, we figured it out, and it grew faster than inflation and population growth, and we hammered them on it. And that was a statewide thing, and we got PolitiFacted, which is actually way better for you than you think.
Oh, really?
No matter what the finding is, because not only have you gotten coverage, because they have to point to where either you said it, you did it, so they're drawing attention to what you've done. Then they're examining what you're saying, so you're getting that coverage. Then you're going to be able to talk about why you disagree or agree with what they said. So when they said something about our statement that the budget outgrew population growth and inflation, and they gave us a half-true, which all they said in their defense, as they brought in people from all over to try and to beat down what we were saying, we came to him and said, look, this was the second year of a 2-year legislative session. We had all of these Republicans who were running in 2010, and their message was cutting government. And to them, keeping it flat this is their kind of paradigm in their own language. And we even provided video that, look, when we asked those candidates at events and things like that, what do you mean growth? What do you mean with keeping it the same? What do you mean with cutting it? And we had their answers on tape, and we're looking at these guys. We're saying, look, this is what they were saying 2 years ago. They were elected, and this is what they did. And then they brought in, well, you really need to have an analysis that's more in-depth than the rudimentary things that you did. Okay, well, that's fine, but the statement that we made is still true. It still outpaced these things. So then you have an opportunity to kind of go back with them. You can garner other media because for us, the AJC is our big newspaper, and they run the PolitiFact office for Georgia. And so then we're able to go to the CBS affiliate and say, hey, PolitiFact isn't right necessarily. This is what they said. This is what we were talking about. And so we ended up rolling that over into more media. Then we got radio because of the PolitiFact article. And then, so it really mushroomed, and PolitiFact has made something that, as long as they spell your name right, and they get libertarian in there, man, that's great. Because at least they're talking about you, and you said something that's gotten somebody really worked up because of something you said that they want to have them investigate you. And they think they're doing you a disservice by coming after you with these PolitiFact attack hounds. I don't find that the case. Because you end up getting so much more media and being able to spread your message regardless of what PolitiFact said. In fact, I've almost gotten to the point where I want to have, when we have something really important out there, have somebody challenge what we say.
Yep.
And now they're even going in, not even press releases, but even emails that you're sending out to supporters. If they're on your list or somebody forwards that email to them, they're ready to fight that. So that makes it even easier, because now you're getting press coverage for something that they want to attack you on, but they didn't even print it.
Yep.
So you got a really unique opportunity with PolitiFact. So don't shy away from don't be the no comment to the PolitiFact guy, because it's another mention of the name, it's another mention of the party. They're going to have to quote you. They're going to have to list you as part of their research on the right side of the page. So it's a really unique opportunity for us, and we can utilize that. And we can utilize it not from a gotcha for the other guys, but kind of a pseudo gotcha for us. And then make that coverage mushroom. Aaron.
I have a question, just kind of getting back to the basics.
Sure.
Is media coverage an end in itself, do you think, or do you think that it's a means to an end?
I think it's a means because you have to. I mean, there are some things, yes, if the story's out there, you're going to. Usually, what happens for me is it's a story before an event, like a county commission meeting, or you have a press conference or whatever, and it's the build up to it, and you're driving people to what's going on. I've talked about the chicken stuff that we've been doing where I live, and when you have a room filled with 120 people all wearing yellow, it's because they saw it in the newspaper, they saw it on television, they've seen the groundwork that we've laid. We've made friends with the local reporter for the AJC, for example. I know that I can call Janelle when she's back from her maternity leave. I have her replacement, that I can call right now. I know that I can call my ABC affiliate news guy. Just send him a text message and say, hey, are you going to be at the meeting tonight? And usually he already knows about it way before I tell him. But they've gotten really good about focusing on the community issues because they're trying to be less of the apartment fire, murder, half hour, however long it is. So they want to do a little bit more. And and the key for me is not necessarily leading with the libertarian label. I mean, I'm not going to carry it. I don't have a little sign for when I'm on TV that says libertarian underneath me. But people recognize you by name, recognize you by face, and regardless of if you're representing for example, if Heather was doing something for TAG, that's still good for the Libertarian Party because they're recognizing Heather from TAG and they're recognizing Heather, who's the same person for the Libertarian Party of Texas. And when you're involved in those other groups, it helps you, especially if you're involved in a local group outside of your state organization, because the single issue folks are going to be able to make a lot more noise. And it appears a lot less partisan because they're interested in that story. And when it's not necessarily Team D, Team R, Team L, Team G, Team C, those they're less likely to cover because then they're going to have, if I talk to the libertarians about this, I'm going to have to talk to the Republicans and I'm going to have to talk to the Democrats. Which is not that big of a deal, but if it's a local guy and he's got a 2-minute and 30-second segment, that's a lot of interviewing and a lot of time that he's not going to be on the air. They're not going to have any B-roll footage to insert into that segment. And so it's a lot more difficult. But if it's the guy from the Backyard Chickens Alliance, well, there's no party label associated with that. Then they may only need to talk to the governmental officials that are going to be deciding it at the meeting the next night or that night. And so it's less of a kind of short debate. Now, you can do that with single issues as a representative of the Libertarian Party, but it's a lot easier to get that media initially while you're building the relationships as part of a specific group, whether it's a taxpayer group or property rights group or LGBT group. You're going to be able to get the relationships built locally, and then your contact information is shared like crazy because they know that, okay, well, this isn't a Cobb County tax issue, but we're talking about a regional sales tax. Well, I know the guy that does all the stuff in Cobb, but this is a regional thing for all of Atlanta. All right, well, let's get the 2 or 3 reporters that are working on this big spread. Let's give them the contact information. So then you're reaching out to people in, I live in the northwest part of Atlanta. You're getting the county that's northeast of Atlanta. You're getting Fulton County, which is the main part. And you're getting some, you're making relationships with these other reporters. And just keep that. That's almost as important to me as the CRM stuff that we were talking about in terms of having a list and a file and who's with whom, what areas they cover, and how you can contact them, what they prefer. I know that my ABC reporter likes text messages versus a phone call or an email because he's always out and about, and it's real easy to just say, oh, all right, cool. And then maybe do something back, and he doesn't have to be on the phone because maybe he's interviewing somebody, maybe they're driving somewhere, and he's in a conversation with the cameraman / driver. They're making those teams a lot smaller than they used to be. In fact, now we're starting to see where it's a one-person gig. They have a tripod and a camera and the reporter, and they do the camera work and get the shot set up. Then they're talking to you, and then they go off and shoot a B-roll, and they've cut their payroll, but the person that is the person that's doing the work. So it's a really cool way to, especially if you're able to contact them the way that when you build that relationship, whether it's, an issue-oriented thing or a party-related thing, they're going to get to know you, you're going to get to know them, and actually, have conversations with them outside of politics.
That's the question. I'm sorry, I don't want to. You hit your hand up long before me, Patrick, but I have a question.
Go for it.
Let me ask you: would it be useful to go to these papers, to our newspaper? Again, I don't have many that I can really deal with. Twin Cities never going to cover us unless we break something. Would it be useful for me to go to each newspaper? So the state has a terrible infrastructure for contact. Okay. I won't be able to go to everyone. But would it be useful for me to engage media within a surrounding area? Yep. Like, for example, take the district for the upcoming assembly, if it's my county and another county. If I call and say to the editor, listen, I'd love to just come in for a couple of minutes and talk to you, figure out how you want me to interact with you, how, what I can do, and then build some report. Is that something that people do, or
yes.
Would that be...
When I ran for office, and I've done it a little bit for the party, but most of the coverage that I'm getting now is as an elected official. Mm-hmm. But when I ran for office, I said, hey, I called the editor. I knew who covered education for that paper. I talked to her. I said, I really want to talk to Otis. He's since passed. His son has taken over the paper. I want to talk to Otis and Joe about my race. And I want to talk, I want them to treat me like any other candidate. I'm on the ballot. You guys know that I'm way more interesting than anybody else that's on the school board because, what's going to be more controversial than one of those crazy anarchist libertarians who wants to sell the schools off to the Chinese?
Bingo.
That was actually how I sold it.
Really?
Yeah. And they said, oh, that sounds great. And then I got in the room and, I'm professionally dressed. I was there 15 minutes early. I introduced myself to the people that I didn't already know from being around town. Mm-hmm. And we had a great conversation. And then at the end they said, so what's this about selling off the schools to the Chinese? I said, oh, I was just kidding about that. I just wanted to get in the room with you guys. And they really respected that I thought of something that was unique to get to them. Mm-hmm. They're asking for op-eds now. They're really asking for letters to the editor because they see that there's so much that I can say, whether it's about an education issue or if it's about another. In fact, we had a Facebook post of mine got news coverage and was actually part of a huge media swirling storm because of something somebody else said in the article, but it got a lot of positive stuff for us. The Georgia GOP chair lives in the same county that I do. And you remember around the time that they had all of the Supreme Court hearings about same-sex marriage and DOMA, all that stuff that was going on, it was like 3 days back to back where it was, it was almost impossible to have any news that wasn't about GLBT in the political sense. And you saw people changing their Facebook profile pictures to the red with the pink equal sign. And, among libertarians, we had some adoption of that, some of we don't really want to get into exactly what that is. You know what? It's part of an overall support movement. But she was interviewed about that. I was interviewed about that. And, I had some very common sense things to say. Look, at the end of the day, I'd love to have government out of marriage, but in the interim, I know that they're not going to cede power. So I'm going to take what, I'm going to push for a equal treatment under the law. That was kind of the quote that I had. That was the big part of the story in terms of what the paper presented, because it was an elected official who really doesn't have anything to do with LGBT, GLBT stuff. I mean, that's not really an issue for our school system, coming out in support of marriage equality in a very red county, in a very red state. And then they had the Georgia GOP chair, and she said some crazy things. I mean, Maddow was all over her. The story was on Colbert. It got blown up like crazy. And when people were coming back to the original article, which was one of the most widely read articles online because of all the links into it from all these various media sources who were making fun of her, but all of her stuff is down at the bottom of the page, and all the good stuff for me is at the top of the page. All those people saw that.
I'm telling you, the media loves us. Love's a strong word, but there's a lot more support. I don't know.
Yeah. Can you talk about building and maintaining media contact lists?
Yeah, collective
Before we move on
cards.
to that, Patrick, I want to ask a quick question on this LGBT. Is this a winning issue for us in our towns?
Depends.
I'm in a very red district.
Okay.
But in terms of, I think of that. We're very conservative, but we're very socially liberal, which makes it a very libertarian area.
Then this is a great issue for you.
I thought Ron Paul did a beautiful job on this. Is it a winning issue to use this as we need to take marriage out of this civil union? I actually did a video that one of the members said, this is where I said basically, listen, the first step within this whole thing is to remove every reference to marriage from our laws. And I even said, give the red team their ball and let them go home. Is this going to be something where we're going to alienate people? Is there too much religious side to this where they're going to go, but the Bible, I
live in the buckle of the Bible Belt. If there is an LGBT thing and it's outside of our version of Haight-Ashbury and parts of San Francisco that are known for being predominantly gay, we have Midtown Atlanta. If it's outside of Midtown, then it's not exactly a popular position, but it gives you an opportunity to talk to people about it. And it gives you an opportunity to talk to them about, well, why did you want to bring government into your marriage?
Well,
and it's a door
in the
of
Bible that says anything about civil unions. I mean,
yeah.
Well,
from a biblical standpoint, you get a civil union to your chair for all a Christian cares. I mean,
Right.
Well, exactly, and that's one of the things that I was talking about. I really should release this and blog it. I thought it was a really good video, but that was that same basic idea I had, which is that people should have the right and the ability to take whatever one other individual and give them that same property civil right that you have within a marriage contract now, but it should be a civil union contract between any two people.
Well, it depends regionally about where you are a little bit more. I mean, and what the political tides are for you in the tack that you take. There are going to be some places where it's probably going to be cool to hop on the government out of marriage entirely. That's the only way to go because you've got so many socially conservative people that can buy into that and come, where they can say, I totally get where you are. Personally, I'm very socially conservative, but on this issue, I don't want the government in a relationship with myself and my wife, or myself and my husband. For us, we're starting to see a change in Georgia, not just in the metro area being blue, but we're starting to see the social issues, give the opportunity for the Republicans to hang themselves when they say something stupid.
As they always do.
Where basically, they say something like, I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry, is their reason for opposing it, because straight people will get in these domestic partnerships or get married for the benefits and screw the system. Yeah, because there aren't straight couples doing that now.
Right.
So it all depends on what's going to work for you, what's going to, and again, you have a wide range. We fully support what the HRC is doing to, we don't want to add to it. We want to be out entirely. It's going to be, your message has to be for the folks that are there. What works in Atlanta is not necessarily going to work in Austin, because Austin is so weird.
You know, we're not going to win elections in, I'm sorry, let me rephrase this. We're not just a white state, we're a very white state, with the exception of some places in Madison and then South Milwaukee. But still, we have clubs in South Milwaukee, so this is a question for me to take back to the state, because we have a meeting in about 2 weeks. Is it easy isn't the right word, is it palatable to engage ethnic groups on issues that are destroying? I think, you know, my point being is that Walker has had significant luck with school choice because of the schools in Milwaukee, but it hasn't really penetrated the voter base, you know, within the black community, even though he was responsible for the entire thing, essentially. But would it be worthwhile to engage what the war on drugs has done to that community? You know, and can we, you know, the Republicans can't talk about what the war on drugs has done to the black community because they did it. And the blue team can't really talk about the war on drugs and what it's done to the black community because they did it. And they don't care to engage it because they already have it.
Yep.
Is there space in the middle there for me to take these two and rip them through this messaging on that? And will the media pick up if we create a firestorm around that? Is there more danger or is there more opportunity?
I don't know that you're necessarily good. This isn't really kind of a media thing.
Mm-hmm.
It would be more of an outreach thing first, because in specifically what you're talking about, you would be better off having a person, and completely politically incorrect, you'd be better off having a person of color talk about that issue.
Come out with that issue.
Yes, because they could be that spokesman. But if you don't have anybody, you said you're a very white state. Then, and honestly, we're a very old white man party still. You know, we're starting to see.
How do we get the kids in here? Man, they're showing up for droves for Ron Paul's, you know, and I know they're out there for us. How do we get them to engage?
Well, that's a whole nother panel for another time.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'll come back to the media thing.
Building a media list.
Yes, show up to. You're going to know when there's a big media story happening, and what I did was I was following one channel. I was looking at who I saw covering Cobb County 2 or 3 days out of that week, who was covering Fulton County, who was covering Gwinnett County, who was covering DeKalb, who was covering Rockdale, Clayton, you know, basically the metro area for Atlanta. And then I was looking at so I knew kind of who the players were, I knew what they looked like. And with a lot of those reporters, they're not going to be the ones that are on billboards. You see the anchors on billboards.
Right.
And then I was going to the big Atlanta Public Schools meetings when they were talking about what they were, you know, the cheating scandal that we had in Atlanta, which was huge. I mean, that's still a media story. You had 34 teachers and administrators that were arrested for their role in that cheating scandal, and the cover-up that came. And
that was in your area? That's right.
Yeah.
I heard about that.
Brett,
Yeah.
I don't know the history on this, what we did in Indiana, but I'm under the understanding that we actually bought a media list.
Yeah,
Is that very common?
that's a very get everybody thing.
Right.
But what I'm talking about building here by figuring out those
part
people.
of where your head was, how do I even get started? So
Yeah.
maybe you buy the media list and then you use that to target.
Actually, in Wisconsin, we have a site that has
I
every
didn't even
single
do that.
news listed, but you have to go and aggregate that out yourself. And
No, every state has essentially just a packet of, and it lists, you know, what the market is. If it's way across Georgia down and way southeast, you know, you get the editor's name, you get the phone number of the paper, you get the email address, you get the fax number for press releases.
Yeah, and it's all every tiny little.
Yep. Every dinky little paper that's the legal organ for all their stuff. Yeah, you get that, but in terms of
expensive,
$75.
oh, that's not bad.
I mean, this is something that I think we could all afford out of our pocket.
Yeah.
But looking for the local stuff, I went to the big story and met who the reporters were that were there. I looked for the people that had their laptops, because you know that they're taking notes or they're live blogging if it's, you know, kind of the patch stuff that I talked about in the social media thing. You can clearly tell who's with the TV stations because they're all standing near their cameras. And so I would go about 10 minutes before the meeting was called to order, and I would just walk the room. And I'd say, hey, I'm Brett with Libertarian Party of Georgia. Gave them my card, got theirs. Hey, I'm Brett and I made the rounds, and I did that for all of the Metro Atlanta. And then when I knew that there was something local, I picked one. I didn't blast it. It was very surgical. I picked one person to have exclusivity immediately on something. You're the first person I called about this. And they love being the first person you called rather than one of 800 people that got a media advisory about an event. And that was what I did because that one person would have the story and it didn't contact anybody else. Then everybody was jealous about the fact that these guys got a story. So then they're covering what was going on because they're reacting to and it also helps to know the media farms, like who's together. Like I know that our TV station, the ABC TV station, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and the main news talk station are all owned by the same media family. They're all Cox Media. I know, and you know, there's others. WGST has their stuff, and you know, the Channel 11 guys have their stuff. They're getting at, and it's just, you know, when you see the vertical integration, actually that's really more horizontal, but they're all part of the same team. You start to see that if you get one part of that team working on something, then they'll tell the radio guy, and then they'll tell the print guy, and then you're getting multiple coverage. But I did it very surgically and very specifically to one, and I never showed favoritism. It was just, you were the first one that, I have the best relationship with you, so I'm going to talk to you first.
Have you been able to engage GPR?
I'm sorry?
Public radio? Has public radio engaged with you guys? Have they done?
Yes.
They do a lot of interview segments. You know, it's kind of the afternoons are all interviews.
Yep. Yeah, it's part of Georgia Public Broadcasting. They do TV, radio, and they do. They have a very robust web presence, and we also have. You have the state. You have a local NPR affiliate. You have the state Georgia Public Broadcasting, and then you have the local City of Atlanta stuff too. So even if it's a metro story, you can get that super hyper local
Right.
public broadcasting thing.
Well, to follow up, it kind of seems to me that there's three approaches. One is to kind of do it manually and meet individuals and get business cards and enter the stuff.
Yep.
Another way is to get a list like what you're talking about. My understanding is there's a third option, which is some kind of subscription service where they're maintaining it and it's current, and you pay whatever a month so that
You're talking like the
your
PR Newswire
database, you
story,
say, send this,
Yeah.
and it takes care of it. So can you compare those three approaches?
I hate the PR Newswire thing because I'm able to be more effective and get more coverage without it.
The PR, that's the third one?
Yeah, that's the third one. Where or you do it per press release. Where you say, hey,
Okay,
I want to get this to
I see.
whatever, and they tell you, okay, it'll be $50 for us to ensure that it's emailed and faxed to everyone.
Okay,
And they just have an auto dialer.
yeah,
They put the press release in,
yeah,
hit the button, and it goes to 700 things. But they're essentially doing a lot of the work of that list that Matt was talking about buying, which is great for the small town
Yeah.
stuff because it's usually one or two people.
yeah.
And so you're able to get those when you have something local, but when you do that manual walk around that I did, you're not sending to news at ajc.com. Which may be a list that 7 or 8 people get, and you know when you're on a distribution list, you're a lot less likely to read it than if it's directed to you as, whatever your personal email address is.
So is it fair to say?
You have to combine, and there are some things where, it's so important that, I need to pay $50, $100 to make sure that press release goes to everybody that it needs to go to, because it's a huge deal. Then there's some of those things, like I said, you can, when you form that relationship, you're going to get the local coverage, and you're like the mushroom stuff happening. But you can target if it's a local story. If it's a statewide story, then maybe you're going to want to get, blast it out to that list.
Right.
But if you segment who you're sending to, like I said, you guys have multiple media markets as well.
Yeah.
So I've set up our contact information by parts of the state, kind of who the media market serves. So I know if it's a coastal thing, that it's going to be the Savannah market, maybe Jacksonville. If it's a north border thing, it's going to be Chattanooga. If it's, you know, an Atlanta thing, it's Atlanta. So I'm utilizing all of them. But you have to figure out what's going to work. I mean, again, you don't want to tell the guy in Houston about what's going on in Dallas, because they may as well be on separate continents for the most part.
Well, would it be fair to say your approach takes more work?
Yes.
So
There's no
the
shortcut.
investment and time you put into that is time that you're not putting into some other thing. So the overall question is, what kind of return on investment do you get through the time you put into media versus all the other things that
Great
you get
question.
invest in?
That is a good question,
Great
because we wear so many hats, you know, whether it's at the local level, state level, or national level. And so you really do have to pick that. For me, the immediate return was that I knew that I was going to get media coverage for my candidates that year. That was the most important thing to me right then, and rebuilding the fractured relationship that we had. And my goal was to get our guys on TV. That was all I cared about, was getting my guy on TV. And our big election year is the off presidential midterms. And so I wanted to make sure that from September to mid-November, I always had one of our candidates on TV. And when we did this, you know, it was our first time we'd had a libertarian running for every statewide office. That was really important to us to push that, because this was the first time we'd done it. We had a lot of good people, and I'll tell you, I ranked my candidates. Who's best with the media, you know, who's going to get the most out of it. And, you know, obviously I put my top of the ticket guy, John Mons, at the top of my list. If he was available to do it, he did it. If it wasn't him, it was somebody from his team. Then maybe we went to the U.S. Senate guy. Then we went to the state school superintendent candidate. Then we went to the Secretary of State candidate. I mean, I knew, you know, when I was going down the list of, when they would call me and say, hey, we need a libertarian's perspective on whatever, we're covering the statewide races and we need a libertarian to talk about their race, I would go through. I would start at the top. John, are you available? No. Chuck, are you available? No. Kira, are you available? No. David, are you available? No. And I would go down, and there were some at the bottom that, okay. And we, you know, when you're filling out a slate, you got some candidates, but I was giving preference to the ones that I knew that would represent us well.
You know, one thing you said there, Brad, that was really interesting and important.
Hang on, Bob.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Aaron, behind you.
Oh, here.
How many, I'm trying to get an idea, I'm trying to quantify this in my own head. How many man hours do you spend a week on cultivating and working with the media, and what type of, I don't know, number of mentions or some other metric that you have that says this is the outcome that I'm getting from this?
Now, I do a lot less, because I've done not all of the legwork, because they're still keeping up contacts and things like that. But and one thing that I'll mention in a little bit to help with that, to help cultivate the relationships, I actually friend these guys on Facebook and LinkedIn and know what they're doing, and when they change stations, that's one of the things that I always make sure I congratulate them when they get a promotion or they change stations or they've got something different. But right now, I would say that maybe an hour a week at this point.
What did you start off with? Was it 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week?
When I was making the rounds for the Atlanta media, just trying to build a list from scratch, it was probably about 25 hours a week for 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, it took some time to sit down and write, you know, and I just sat in front of the TV and I watched the ABC newscast. Then the next day I watched the CBS newscast. Then I'd watch the Fox newscast. Then I'd watch the NBC newscast, and then I started all over. Some of those I'd watch in the morning, some of them I'd watch in the evening. I found that you get more legs on out of stories that air in that 4 to 7 range now, because they're carrying over to the 10 and 11 o'clock news if there's not a big apartment fire or it snowed 500 miles away from Atlanta and we need to be ready with our milk, bread, and toilet paper. They'll run it again at 11. And if they run it again at 11, there's not a whole lot of developing stuff overnight. So then they'll run it again at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock, whatever their schedule is. So I focused, when I figured that part out of how easy it was, then I only focused on the ones that I saw in that evening newscast. And I never went with the anchors. Although weekend anchors are good ones to hit because they're often doing reporting stuff during the week and trying to get their break. And they're a little hungrier. And so, but for the most part, I was looking at reporters themselves. And yeah, it took me about 25 hours a week as I was doing the research, labeling who was with whom, how frequent they were, what part of the metro area they covered, and then found what they were going to be covering. That was the hard part, was seeing what they were going to be covering, but now social media has made that easier. And a lot of these big media conglomerates are forcing their reporters to have Facebook pages and Twitter accounts and LinkedIn accounts where they're sharing that information. And so now I know that if they're, I need to see what's going to be on the 4 o'clock for the I-Team investigative journalist. I just go to his page about noon and he starts pimping what he's airing at 4 or 5.
So you answered part of the question.
Yeah. So initially, it was a lot of work. And I think that now I'm getting more of the benefit, number one, from a decreased workload in terms of maintaining those relationships that I had to build from scratch. But the ROI for me is entirely mentions, whether it's the party, whether it's me personally, whether it's a group that we're involved in or is...
So how many mentions are you getting? So you put in, just let me restate this. You put in about, roughly, let's say 50 hours of upfront investment time.
Yep.
And then you're maintaining with, let's say, maybe a couple hours a week. For doing that, what is your payback in terms of number of mentions, if that's your metric? How many mentions are you getting each week or each month?
Well, we're not looking at... We're not news makers necessarily because we're more of the commentating on what's going on.
That's fine.
Or adding our opinion to a hot news story or something that's popular.
That's fine.
So it's easy. I can get a mention no matter what with some of these local newspapers. But in terms of a major news story or television story, I would say that we probably hit 1 to 2 a month where we're on TV or we're featured in the AJC about something. And typically a lot of the stuff that's featured in the AJC gets wired out to, the smaller markets within Georgia, with this, along the same lines as the AP, who for some reason doesn't want to cover us. I don't know what that is, but they aren't real responsive to us, even when we have an AP house in Atlanta that works in conjunction with CNN because that's where they're based. And they don't return phone calls. You don't find them at stuff. They're just picking up what local reporters are doing and sending it out on their wire for the most part is what I'm seeing AP do now. They're just kind of repackaging somebody else's work and selling it off. So to get to your, 1 to 2 major things. If I just wanted to get something, I could do that right now. I mean, I could just send out if I had a prepared press release, I know that there are three outlets that would automatically have it for us. It would be an online mention, and then it would be in their semi-weekly or weekly edition. And it's word for word, except for the stuff that I put at the bottom about how awesome we are.
Do you have any sort of structure where some committee
Nope.
scrutinizes something?
Nope.
So you draft the press release, you
Nope.
send it.
Communications director does all that work.
Communication.
Okay, but still,
so
that's a good
you
question.
have a communication, it's not you?
Nope.
Okay, so there's a communication director, so if you say, man, this just happened, we've got to get something out there, you call that person and
Yep.
they send it and there's no, the state committee needs to see it first.
Nope. I see it. If
Okay.
there's something I don't like, I send it back, and that's it.
So that's it. That's your, because
Yeah.
we've been, again, I've had this problem in our...
I think the news cycle get to have a committee. Okay.
Right.
Okay,
No,
committees
that's-
and news cycle, you've got to
Here's the
time
thing.
it.
Committees are where work goes to die.
Mhm.
Yes.
Action goes to die in a committee. But our board isn't focused on
Mhm.
the operations. The worst that could happen for me is if I'm going to be overruled, it's going to be by my vice chair because technically he's my boss. The communications director reports to me, I report to the vice chair. And if something's screwed up, then the vice chair is all over me about it. But they're a strategic planning, vision,
Right.
Budget approval, not budget building entity.
Mhm.
Operations in the office is almost a whole nother ball game. And because of the successes we've had, they really want to keep it that way. Because we've had really hands-on boards, and it stifled what was the actual work part.
Right.
And so, one of the reasons that for the reason list,
Yeah.
I did not take that to the board. I said, hey, Doug, we have an opportunity to do this. Do you think we could build consensus among a few states to buy this list? And they didn't even know that it happened until I asked the treasurer to write the check. And I said, I've already raised the money for it. It's, we don't have to do anything for this. We've already raised it. We're paying our portion, and boom, we're done. So for me, there's no committee. There's nobody who's telling us that press release can't go out because of X, Y, or Z. They're trusting the people that are in place that are the staff that are running the
Okay.
party.
Because that was a challenge that I've already had
Yeah.
with the state. These cats just don't. At the local party, nobody else is involved.
Now, local is much different.
Yeah, but at the state, I've written 3 or 4 press releases, and then everybody starts commenting on it, and it will change the
Yeah.
mention.
Nope.
Yeah.
It's like, Jesus, man, this is ridiculous. And then the next thing, we'll look at this over the weekend. The storm was freaking last Wednesday. You
Right.
can't release this on Monday and get any
Well,
press.
and you can't release anything after noon on Friday.
Right.
You may, if you
It's
want
done.
coverage, yeah.
We missed all the weekend papers on it too. It was in the state. It could have been a huge opportunity, but so that's interesting. That's good to know. Thank you.
We recently did a press release, and we didn't get any publicity out of it, except for the one guy that accidentally submitted it as a letter to the editor. Should we be doubling up?
No.
Okay.
No, you're going to want to, okay, that's actually the next thing I wanted to talk about is op-eds and letters to the
It's
editor.
actually 10 o'clock.
Is it?
Yeah.
I knew I talked too long.
But
Well,
that's good.
Until they kick us out,
Yeah.
we'll keep going.
Yeah.
We got a couple minutes. So op-eds are rare, and usually they're asking you for them about a particular issue. A letter to the editor needs to be 200 to 300 words, real quick. It's going to show up, and it doesn't need to be Travis County Libertarian Party chair. It just needs to be who is that? Caroline?
Caroline, yeah.
It just needs to be Caroline Gorman
Mhm.
sending it in, and then she can share it among her folks, and then you'll build the buzz that way. And but they know once you get 1 or 2 published, and there's a lot of traffic that comes to it, because they're looking at that metric now. If they're not a paywall, which the AJC is doing the dumbest thing ever with their paywall, but if people are coming to read that letter to the editor, then they're going to want that person to write more. So anytime they send them something, it's going to get views, and you have to push that. And you're not necessarily pushing who you are, you're pushing your philosophical belief on whatever that issue is. You're talking about libertarianism. You're not, I try not, it's hard now, but I try not to lead with that label. I would rather do the work and just talk about the idea,
Right.
because I'm going to convert people to adopting the idea and building a rapport with them.
And this can be done, and to your question earlier, what's good contact and how often does this hit? With every press release that you send out, or with any event that occurs that you can get coverage for your party in, you should always have a planned follow-up of a letter to the editor campaign as well. So we had our caucus, and then I said to the members at the end of the caucus, I said, now what you should do is go home and write a letter to the editor to tell them what happened. So we got a beautiful piece of the paper, and then the week after that we had a letter to the editor show up. And it gives you that, now I'm in the paper twice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and here's the thing with that, unless you have a team of people that's really good at writing,
Right.
have kind of a generic letter to the editor where they can change a few things, but and give them, hey,
Yes.
change this part to make it a little more personal to you. Change this to be your local city or whatever it is. and submit it as you have that kind of generic letter that you're saying
Right.
to your 10 or 15 people who do that. If you can build a team of 10 or
If
15
you can build
people
it,
to do that,
that's the tough part is to get that network of letters in. The tough thing you have to be careful about is when papers start to see letters that look very, very similar in other papers, and they read them because they get their news, they get news tricks from them. They see them, they'll stop accepting letters from these people if they think that this is a game marketing ploy. So yes and no, yeah, you're absolutely right. You got to make sure that these are different enough.
Yep.
Or get lucky enough you have someone who can put together a coaching letter.
and then once you've had a couple letters to the editor, ask to write op-eds.
Mhm.
You obviously like the content that I'm doing. Let me write something for you.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
a lot of times, I mean, that's free.
Mhm.
That's free to them. They don't have to pay a reporter to write it. They don't have to pay their columnist to write it. You know, they're getting it for free from you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it may not be as timely. You know, it may be that it's a week later than you wrote it, but it's getting out there.
One thing that we did in California when I was state chair is we created an op-ed piece that went out on a weekly basis called the Libertarian Perspective. And I lined up quite a few really good writers where they would take turns. It's like, hey, this week is your turn, this week, and so forth. And it would be sent out to the entire media list up and down the state, and there were always a few papers that would pick it up and actually print it.
Yep.
Now that's an interesting idea, is to take a list of your headlines, major headlines in the state, and then, so how big were your hits? A paragraph or two for each item?
This is an op-ed piece.
Oh,
So you're talking 600-700 words that are
Yeah,
on.
we're talking about basically a standard op-ed piece, and I had the best writers that I could find who just loved doing that. Said we're going to put out something that's going to be called the Libertarian Perspective, and if there's 6 people writing, you're expected to put out one piece every 6 weeks. The reality is that you probably have some of them right, because you're going to have some people who flake. Those people you're going to eliminate over time. But you try to get it out every single week, and the press got used to it, and some of them were actually published.
Well, I want to thank you guys for a great conversation. I liked having
you.
it
I've enjoyed
smaller
it.
because it was more intimate and we were having a conversation rather than just talking. So
Yep.
thanks, guys.
Good job.
Thank you, sir.